Hello, welcome to another episode of the Bonsai Stuff podcast. I'm Scott Martin from Bonsai Matsu. I love you all. Thank you very much for listening in. I'm very fortunate in the fact that I get to spend a hell of a lot of time in front of trees, in front of bonsai, working on them, and I get to think about a lot of content for the podcast and what can be interesting, what can be useful, and what I suppose everyone can benefit from. And to also, I suppose, get into my head and work out when I'm working on a tree what it is that I'm trying to do and what I'm trying to achieve. So this episode of the podcast, I thought I'd talk about a bit of design stuff, some things that have been a heavy focus for me. I've been working a lot lately, if you've seen any of the socials, working a lot on junipers and there's a cedar and that sort of stuff. And my approach to working trees is pretty consistent, and they've got a feel to them. I get that, and one of the things that I really focus heavily on is the pad work and the importance of pad separation specifically. So I want to talk about how I approach that and why I think it's important, and also want to talk about another design component that constantly runs through my head every single day that I'm working on trees, and it's compaction. How do I make something reduced in size? How do I make this tree back to where it was? And terms inner buds are going to come up again, and as well as the bud conveyor, that's going to get talked about again. But there are a couple of really important things that I focus heavily on when I'm working on trees that I thought you might get benefit out of. So let's get into the podcast. Pads on bonsai are crucial to the tree. Doesn't matter what sort of design it is, what sort of style it is that you're going for, what the tree looks like. The foliage coming off a branch is a pad, and sometimes you want to try and make them not look like they're a cloud. Sometimes you want to make them look like they're a cloud. It depends on your interpretation of the tree's design and what it is, but regardless, it's a pad. I don't care how you look at it. It's going to form an area of foliage that is linked to a primary branch that, one way or another, it's going to have its own area, and that's a pad. That's how I see a pad anyway. So when I'm working with the trees, it's very easy to design and prune one large pad, and I see it a lot when I work with trees that look too heavy visually. I'm talking about visually heavy, the visual weight of the tree. When the foliage mass is connected around the entire tree, I find for me it's way too visually heavy, and it can overpower the trunk. So thick trunk, thin trunk really doesn't make a difference to me. But other than the light of the trunk, really the light of the pads need to be, or the light of the foliage needs to be. So having some, really massive, big, heavy, dense pads on a really super light trunk can look like the thing wants to tip over, and just doesn't look right. It looks out of balance. So the visual pad weight needs to balance with the trunk thickness. But regardless, I've worked on a lot of trees with quite thick trunks, and I still try to break down those pads and make them so they're not joined together as one big lump. And to break them apart, there's a bit of a process that I go through. But before that, I want to issue some bonsai homework for you. After you've listened to the podcast, you may sort of go, yeah, whatever, I'm just going to keep doing it the way I do it. That's fine. That's no problem. But I think it's really important that if you spend some time and put some effort into searching out trees, looking for trees that you like, anyone's trees, doesn't matter where they are. There's beautiful show over in Japan happening around February, Kokufu, where there'll be a lot of images floating around social media. Have a look at those trees, and the ones that you're drawn to, the one that you go, that's fantastic. Break down and step back and have a look at it and go, what's the pad structure like? What's the pad separation like? Is it one massive pad, or is it broken down into a lot of smaller areas that create so many different interest points that your eye doesn't know exactly where to look? You start at one point, you start moving around and going, wow, that's just beautiful. It just looks like there's pads everywhere on this tree. They're the ones for me anyway. And I mean, design's unique. It's individual. It's you. It's me. So it may not be the case, but I'd almost bet my bottom dollar that a lot of the trees that you get drawn into are going to have a break in the pad structure. They're not going to be large areas. It's going to be the ones that are separated, that are broken apart, that have all these different areas, not just a big blob of foliage, but lots of little areas or different areas of foliage that you're going to be drawn into. You know, that the pad structuring helps us with the flow and movement of the tree because it sort of guides us where we want to go, static or strong directional movement one way or the other. So the pad structure is very important, and pad separation is one of the keys to really good bonsai. And it's difficult when you first start trying to get your head around, you know, pad separation and how do I break apart one big blob of foliage? How do I start working through it? And I've just got a couple of easy steps. You know, I love my bullet points. I love to break things apart and think about how I do things and use it in a context that I can talk about in the podcast because it makes it obviously viable and a bit easier. So for me, start with the primary branches. Look at where the primary branches come off the trunk. So they're the key branches feeding off that trunk. Often when I see larger pads, there'll be maybe 2 or 3 primary branches that have come together, and then that's pruned to be one big dome or one big pad. If you can get those primary branches and separate those and use that as the very first starting point for pad separation, then I guarantee you life will be a lot easier. You'll be able to achieve that separation a lot easier. When you have quite significant primary branches, like you might look along a primary branch and go, yeah, okay, they're all separate. Like they're all got their own foliage pad, but the visual weight of those pads is still too large. The step 2 is to come along and look for the secondary branches. Look for some significant branches feeding off the primary branch and see if you can use those to separate into individual areas. Now, one of the methods that I use early days when I was trying to get my head around this approach myself is because you're looking at a massive foliage and you're going, it's together. Like I can't see how this is going to work separately. Is to run a cloth, a tea towel, anything between the two, or a piece of paper between the two areas that you're trying to separate. It might be more, might be 3, 4, whatever it is. But run a piece of paper between those areas and then put on your blinkers so you're only looking at the one pad that's in front of you. When you look at 2 that are joined together, it's very easy to see the shape, you know, the falling to the left and right, you know, the peak from the front up to the middle and down to the back, like that traditional pad shape. When you isolate them, when you look at just one individual branch by itself, then you'll see that it won't have that shape. And then for me, that's where I start doing my work. I'll look at one branch and I'll go, it might need to be wide and moved apart as well. But once I've got it separate, once I'm visually only looking at one single branch, then I'll start working on my shape. That's when I do the unders, the top down shape that I want to achieve, and then the front left to right, that up and down, up, lower point up to a high point in the middle and back down to a lower point on the other side of the pad. And from the front, low point to a high point in the middle of the pad to a low point at the back of the pad. And then I'll take the cloth that's covering the one pad that's I'm ignoring at the moment, then I'll put it over the pad that I've just worked and I'll go back to the original pad that's been covered and I'll do the same thing. And then when you reveal and move the cloth away and you've got 2 pads there that are shaped individually, you start to get it. It starts to fall into place. You go, oh, now I can see it. Now it's started to work. Like it's started to break apart. And like I said, you might need to wire, and not only wire them apart from each other, wire them at different heights up and down, different planes. So move them from being one blob in one area to 2 pads that are spread apart, split left and right, but also split up and down. So there's one slightly higher, one slightly lower, and that's the beautiful, interesting part about the pad separation and the pad structure. And the trees, like the homework that I talked about, when you have a look through, don't only look at the pad separation, but look at if you could get a line, take a screenshot of it and draw some horizontal lines and some vertical lines like a grid, place that over the top of that image, and you'll see that the ones that really grab your attention cover off on all different planes. They're all different left and right. They're all different up and downs, and they're all in different areas. But overall, the silhouette of the tree still achieves a shape that you are interested in, that you like, but it's broken apart. And there's, terms like negative space where there's nothing that draw you in, that really accentuate and magnify the beauty of those pads, because there's nothing there. When they're all lumped together and they look quite heavy, you can find that it just becomes a little bit too overpowering. And you look at it and go, yeah, it's nice. It's a beautiful shape. Like, I love the shape of the tree. It's, it's doing this, it's doing that, whatever it is. But when you can break it apart, when you can separate those pads, when you can get those different planes up and down, left and right, covered off in the tree, but then sit back and look at the overall silhouette of the tree where it all comes together and go, it's still got exactly the same shape, but I've got less foliage, which, means it opens it up a lot more, and, you let sunlight into those areas. It means the tree's going to be healthier. Solar panels, the green foliage can do its job for the tree and photosynthesize. The tree's going to get stronger overall. We're going to talk more about inner buds and stuff like that in the next section of the podcast. But really, not only are you visually making the tree more attractive, you're actually making the tree a lot stronger as well, because if you have one large pad, one large, heavy weighted, dense bunch of foliage, the inner area on that tree is going to really suffer. There's no two ways about it. Sure, the external part will be nice and strong, but all those different internal areas, the inner foliage will start to die off. It has to. It's just the way the world works when you talk about trees that are super dense. So it really does make a big difference by trying to separate those pads. Look at the primary branch. Come along the primary branch. If the primary branch is individual, if it's not, separate the primary branches with a bit of wire, guy wires, whatever it is. Look at them, left and right, pushing them apart. Look at them up and down. Get them on different levels as well. Make sure the overall silhouette still remains intact. But then, put on the blinkers, so you are the horse blinkers, so you're only looking. You've got tunnel vision. You're only looking at that individual pad, and you're shaping that one pad at a time. That is it. Nothing else. You're not looking at the overall shape of the tree. You're not looking at how it's going to work in the scheme of things just yet. All you're doing is working on that one pad to get that beautiful shape that we love with our trees. And if the primary branches are already separated, come along the primary branch and start looking at the secondary branches. On a tree, for me, my approach is, three pads and an apex is far less. It's far, inferior to a tree that's got 15 pads and an apex. And even the apex, break that up a little bit as well. Don't go for the full helmet. Try and break it so a little bit of light and air can get in there. I just think that it takes a lot more skill. It looks a lot better longer term. Short term, you might find that when you first start working with a tree, say juniper, and you're breaking apart those pads, you might look at it and go, oh, it looks so much better if they were all together. So I'm gonna keep them together because I want to form a pad now. I want to do it right now. I want this perfect. Please listen. Separate them. Get them separated as soon as you can. They'll grow a lot stronger on that basis. But then in the future, you'll have so many more branches to work with. You won't have to worry about dead spots when a tree becomes too dense. You won't have to worry about moving and shuffling from the start when you're working with the tree. Start looking at separating those branches, those pads, and let them grow individually. Over time, you'll find that they'll get, I'm talking years down the track. You'll find that they will get too big and too dense anyway. So you'll be continually going through and thinning these things out. Even if it starts to look a bit wispy at the start, look at the tree, look at the height of it and go, okay, well, I can either do 3 pads or I can do 30 pads. Trust me, go for the 30, and then later on as they get bigger, thin them down to 20. Then when it gets thicker again, thin it down to 15 or whatever it is. But don't lump it together initially to make the instant bonsai. Look at the structure, perfect the structure for somewhere in the future, so it's a better bonsai long term. Good structure, good bonsai. It's repetitive. It's over and over and over. Don't take the shortcut. Make sure that you're working to somewhere in the future. And pad separation, it's the key to success. trees, bonsai, they want to grow. They want to push out. They have new shoots. Spring comes around, they go berserk, start pushing out all these spears of growth, these shoots that start to extend. That beautiful word elongate comes out, and everything starts to get longer and longer and longer. And one thing that runs through my head like a metronome every time that I'm working on any tree is, how do I make this more compact? And I'm not talking about spaghetti wiring. I'm not talking about taking a branch and squiggling it back and pushing it in, and taking the cheats way out, and trying to make something that it's not just because I can compress a branch. It's about, what do I do? What can I cut back now? And how's this thing going to grow into the future? Every time I work on the trees, every single time, you look at them, from where they were last time to where they are now. Doesn't matter if it's a month down the track or it's a year down the track or whatever. There's always that extension of growth, and it's like, well, do I just keep letting this thing get bigger and bigger? No, you can't. You just cannot. That is not bonsai. Bonsai is about compaction and keeping everything nice and close. So you want to look at how far can you cut back, and understanding how the tree grows will help you determine as to how long you can let this thing push out before you cut back. Like, if it's a tree with buds, cut back to the first set of buds. If it's the type of tree that back buds from being cut back to nothing, then you can cut it back to nothing, but you're removing all that beautiful structure. So if it's a juniper cutting into the green, pretty much means that you're going to get back budding into that part of the tree. So for me, rather than sort of taking just the tips off a tree when I'm working, it's like, well, how far can I cut this thing back? And I'm not. Please don't look at the silhouette that you're trying to create now. Look at the silhouette that you want to create for somewhere in the future. A lot of trees come through that I look at and go, you really needed to cut that back further. Like, there's 3 or 4 sets of buds there. We need to cut back to the first, but it's like, but it looks beautiful the way it is now. It's like, yeah, but as soon as that grows, as soon as those buds open up and push, you're too far beyond where you want to be, and you're going to have to end up cutting it back anyway. So that it's that whole step backwards to take a step forward. So when you're working on your trees, look at how you can maximize the cutback, so then it can grow to where you want it to be somewhere in the future. But by cutting it back further, you're going to increase the ramification, increase that twiggy nature, increase the overall pad volume, the structure of the pad, because you're cutting it back. It's not going to be long spindly branches. It's going to be lots of fine little branches with all this foliage on the tips of them. So compaction is one of those words that should be plastered on your workshop door or your wherever you do work on your trees. Compaction. How do I get this thing back into a reasonable shape and keep it nice and compact? We've talked about the evolution of bonsai and trying to maintain structural integrity of the design to ensure that we can keep cutting back and maintain the silhouette of the tree that we want forever, for the longest period of time. If things just keep getting longer and longer, then we can't maintain it. We need to eventually change the structure of the tree, change the design, a 5-year cycle and all that, where it just keeps getting longer and longer and longer. And if we don't do these cutbacks, if we don't work to allowing light and air into those inner sections, if we don't work on those, here it comes, those inner buds, if we don't keep them alive, then our tree just keeps growing out further and further and further. And then the word compaction becomes something that we can't work with, because to compact a tree that's grown out too long, that's got no inner buds, that's got nothing left to cut back to, means going back to a 0 point. And depending on the tree that you're working with, that may not be possible. Sure, it may be. It might be. I've seen it plenty of times with things like maples, where they get too long, or you maybe acquire them and they've been managed incorrectly, and then you have to cut them back to a stump, or the branches are back to stubs, and then they reshoot and you start again. But you don't want to start that process every time when your tree gets too big. By managing it correctly and pruning it, every time you work with your tree, it's like compaction. Okay, how do I make this more and more compact? And then naturally you'll fall into line saying, okay, well, if I want it compact, I've got to cut it back. Secondly, I've got to have something to cut back to. How do I make sure I've got something to cut back to? I've got to thin it. how do I thin this thing? All right, so you're removing this, removing that. And why are you removing it? Because you want light and air to get in there. What's the light and air going to do? It's going to stimulate those buds that are in there that are dormant, that sooner or later, somewhere in the future, they're going to push forward and they're going to take over the branch that you're working on. So compaction is something that I find is a key to maintaining and developing really good bonsai. It starts with letting light into those areas, and then we circle back around to why we're doing that. We're doing it for the bud conveyor. And it's that simple process of making sure that we can always have something in the future to cut back to that allows us to have compaction as one of our targets every time that we're working with our trees. And I talked earlier about pad separation. There is no way you'd be able to do pad separation and pad development without these inner buds, without the bud conveyor being active on every tree that you work with. When I work on junipers, I do it once a year, which is a nice solid cut. I've been asked a lot of times, can you do them more frequently? You definitely can. You sure can. But I like to let mine grow and build their vigor through the new foliage that they get. But there's a point where maybe a year is going to be too long. If they get too thick, too dense, if they grow too rapidly, then the bud conveyor starts to fail. So then when you do start removing foliage, it's like, well, now it's too big. I've let it go too long. So you need to make an individual assessment as to how frequently you're working your trees. I'm only talking about junipers because they're front and center for me at the moment because I've been flogging away through a lot of them lately. But it can be any tree that you work on that you look at, natives or whether it's a pine or whatever it is, an azalea. Look at how the thing's going to grow, how it's going to develop its structure, and once it starts getting too thick and dense, take action then. It might be twice a year, it might be 3 times a year, it might be 4 times a year that you're working on these things. It's you can't put an exact finger on a lot of the trees that we work with because it depends on the stage of development they're in, what's happening with them, how they're going to grow when you do certain work on them. I'm not saying that you get in there and overwork your trees, but have a look, separate the pads, push them apart and have a look and see, what's happening on the inside of those pads. Is the foliage thriving? Can you see the bud conveyor at work? Can you at this point in time, we're into the last month of our calendar summer, you should see buds growing in there. It's been a warm time. It's been lots of daylight hours. The tree should be going, yep, I'm still going to push those buds. There should be lots happening in your tree. So if you separate those pads and have a look and go, actually all I can see is dead foliage, get it on the bench. Start to open it up. Maybe it's not a complete thorough workover of whatever it is that you're doing, but it might just be enough to let that light and air in there, get the bud conveyor starting to tick over. So when you do thoroughly work that tree and appropriately work it, you've got something to work back towards. And it's got to be front and center. And for me, I'll work through my garden, I walk through it every single day. And there's some trees that I'll look at and think, yeah, actually getting too dense. I'll have a look at it. I'll separate the pads. If I see it's nice and green in there, okay, I got a little bit longer. If I look at it and start to see there's a bit of dieback, well, okay, I've got to do something about it. Even though I want to leave it for maybe another week or another 2 weeks or another month or another 3 months, whatever it is, it's like I need to do something about that now. Otherwise, in 3 months' time, I'm going to have a dead set issue and I'm going to have problems going into the future for this tree. Anyway, compaction through bud selection, through bud growth is my approach, not through spaghetti wiring and bending branches and pushing them back. Yeah, sure, you can put there's movement and there's, falsifying branch structure. But for me, good structure, good bonsai, part of good structure comes from the appropriate branch growing from the appropriate area, which means that I need that bud conveyor, which means I need to do everything right to ensure that the tree's in the position that it can do that. So compaction, it's a word that should be front and center for everything that you do. And part of your bonsai homework with the pad separation, by all means, have a look at the compaction on those beautiful trees too. It's always there. It's one of the first things I look for is, the foliage length from the trunk line, and the really good trees you look at, it's nice and close. Like there's lots of growth in dead close to the tree, and that comes from really good long-term management of the bud conveyor to make sure that the tree can always achieve that goal for you. You wouldn't believe it, but we are only about 3 weeks out from the autumn calendar period, give or take. Anyway, based on the calendar in Australia, we're about 3 weeks out from autumn or fall, depending on where you're listening to the podcast. And summer's gone fast. Another season looks like it's going to zip past. And to be honest, I love the warm weather. I love everything about summer, but I'm looking forward to this one saying goodbye. There's been some intense weather, and listening to the long-term forecast, they're talking about next summer being an even hotter period, which just tends to blow my mind. But anyway, as we head towards autumn, my mind starts to change from all the work that I've focused on with my trees over this warmer period, and all the watering and all that sort of stuff, to thinking, okay, well, I've got to start getting ready for the next one. I've got to start planning. I've got to start preparing for the next phase of this tree's development. What am I going to do? And for me, autumn is a massive time for fertilising. So, I'd strongly urge you to start getting ready, start preparing, start acquiring what you need to. Get on the front foot. You still got 3 weeks before it's go time, but 3 weeks is going to go past pretty fast, and it's better to be ready to go, Boy Scout, than not. So for me, fertilising is a major one. The other thing I'm doing around the yard at the moment too is just doing that flag for repotting. That's still a way down the track. But now is the time that I can see the issues with the trees, as we've talked about in the last few episodes of the podcast, summer impact. It's those that have been flogged, that have taken the biggest beating, or that I can see that there's issues with, that I really have to keep an eye on when I'm watering. Or I've had to do something special on those trees to get them through, maybe further aerating the soil, or putting them in a more sheltered spot, or putting them into a tray, or whatever it is that I've had to do. They're the ones that I'm saying, okay, I cannot forget to repot you this year. You've got to be done. So I'm starting to make a priority list for trees that need to be repotted around the yard. Summer's a great time to reveal any weakness that you've got. So I use it for flagging and getting myself ready for repotting. Start to plan the required work that needs to be done around the yard and how long it's going to take. So for me, I really focus at this time of the year on my junipers and making sure that they're done well and truly before I get to early autumn, which is when I'm going to start looking through my deciduous and start giving them an autumn prune back. And then after that, I start rolling into pine season, which, the autumn-winter needle plucking just takes forever. So for me, I really have this window to say, okay, you've got to, in the next 3 weeks, you've got to be done with your junipers. You have to have them done. You can work them at different times of the year, but this is just for me to say, okay, you've still got this period of time. You've got this many trees you've got to work through. You can do it. How much time do you need to allocate? So I don't get caught out. I don't miss any trees. I don't leave anything that should get done. So for me, I'd strongly advise you to look through your yard and just go, what needs to be done now before you get to that next period? Don't look at the next period and suddenly go, oh no, I've got all that to do. Plus I've got these ones to do. Use this lull just before we start getting into another really busy period for the trees to make sure that you've done everything that you possibly can. And finally, one other thing, we're still at the point where overwatering really isn't a problem. I look around the country, I check the daily forecast for all different parts of Australia, and I think, look, it's still hot, it's still dry, it's there's rain comes and goes, but really for the southern part, you could water 2, 3, 4, 5 times a day, and really it's not going to be a problem. And you can be using, flooding them with automated watering systems, and the trees will still look great. Everything's fine. But we're at the point where that will change in the future in a relatively short period of time. Don't forget the trees are dictated by the daylight hours. Daylight hours are getting shorter and shorter and shorter, and there'll be a point where they flick a switch and they start to change from where they are right now to a different phase in their life where they go, you know what, we're heading towards a dormancy period. I need to act differently. And when that happens, when that starts to really take hold, watering is going to change, and different trees around the yard are going to need different amounts of water at different times of the day. And it starts to get to that really muddy, grey, complex area where watering goes from being a piece of cake to something that you really need to be aware of. And I'm talking about it now because one of the common things that I see is overwatering as we get into early autumn, where you start seeing damage to the foliage on some of your trees. And it's like, what's causing this? What is it? Is it fungal? No, it's not. It's overwatering. You're giving it too much water when the tree's starting to head towards dormancy, and it doesn't need that much water. So just start reading your trees, start looking at them. Don't start cutting back the water yet. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that in the next short period of time, your watering habits will change. So just look for the indicators when you're going around watering. For a tree that's been, continually dry when you go around and water, it's like, it's always sucking up the water, to then suddenly you look at it and go, actually, that still feels a bit damp. They're the ones that you flag that you go, okay, I've got to keep an eye on this one because, the other trees are still soaking up. This one's starting to slow down a little bit. Change the positioning in the yard, get it out of the water tray if it's in one, or, just maybe a light lick of water, or maybe only water it once a day rather than twice a day. But that's what's going to happen, and you really need to be on the front foot. And this is where watering is so difficult for our trees, and it's difficult to manage for everybody, including me, because these things change, but you get lulled into a false sense because you're out there going, it's the weather's like this and I feel like this. It doesn't mean the trees feel like that. They're doing something very different. So get in close with your trees, get to know them, and make sure that you are watching for those subtle changes when it comes to watering, which will happen in the next short period of time over the change in seasons that we're going to go through. Anyway, that brings us to the end of the podcast. Thank you very much for listening in. Thank you, supporters and subscribers of the podcast. Honestly, I seriously love you all. You're a godsend. So thank you very much, and I love you for it. Thank you to everyone who listens and sends through requests for information or help or support or advice or anything like that, because I do truly love helping you, and I'm glad that in some little way I can be another set of eyes over your tree, and maybe just confirm for you what you were going to do anyway, but just get that network structure set up. So anyway, thank you for listening in. Give your trees a cuddle for me, and as always, until next time, happy bonsai.